Following the U.S. Embassy's warning earlier this week of a potential terrorist attack in South Africa, the government has again urged citizens not to be alarmed, and it appears it's been business as usual this weekend. The initial communique indicated that the attack would basically focus on large crowds of people who gathered in Sandton on the 29th and the 30th of October today. Well, in Sandton yesterday, people marched as part of the Gay Pride Parade, with some 500 other events happening around the city or around the country this weekend also went off without a hitch. Alarmist or is concern valid at this point? Let's speak to security consultant specializing in extremism, terrorism and political violence, Jasmine Opperman. Jasmine, a very good evening. Good morning, excuse me. Welcome to Newzroom Afrika. So, yesterday, everyone was able to gather without incident. We're almost at the end of the weekend. Does that mean that the worst is over?
Good morning, Timbukile, and good morning to the viewers. Good news indeed. So far, so good. But let us not be fooled. The threat is active. The threat is real. We should not see the weekend as a final victory. We need to keep our eyes and our ears on South Africa and the regional vulnerability to terrorism.
But you say the threat is real, but there's a difference of opinion, isn't there, on whether the threat is real, because you've got the United States backed by the likes of the UK, and I think the French also followed suit in issuing warnings to their citizens in the Sandton area to not venture out into crowded areas. But the South African government still maintains that it's not been given or it has not seen any credible information suggesting indeed that there is a very real risk of a threat.
If we talk about Sandton and the threat to Sandton and the 34 congregations we had in Sandton, yes, that has been managed, heightened security measures, well done. What I am talking about, Timbukile, is the vulnerability of South Africa to terrorism. No one can deny that reality in our context. What has happened with the alert, how it was hazed, and the hysteria it has caused is not good news. But at the end, the alert has sent warning signals to this region in how other countries view our capability in dealing with terrorism.
I want to touch on 2 points. I'll get to the hysteria in a moment, but when you talk about South Africa's exposure, shall we say, to threats in terms of potential terrorist activity, what do you mean by that?
First and foremost, I'm going to start off by looking at the domestic context. Islamic State has been present by means of loyalists, as proven by those that went to the caliphate. We have seen the return of several people from Syria's Al-Hol camp into South Africa, which I support. The question how it's being monitored and what they're busy doing. The vulnerability in terms of our court processes to effectively prosecute terrorism remains questionable. And then the big issue that we cannot deny is the Islamic State as a reality in its most brutal form in Mozambique, Cabo Delgado, and the Islamic State not recognizing borders and will not hesitate moving into the region. We cannot ignore these dynamics. We need then the institutions to be able to manage and deal with these individuals proactively. That's where our vulnerability lies.
What would be the goal, though, say, for instance, for people who are part of extremist cells returning from Syria to want to mount an attack on South African soil?
Timbukile, there's one thing we need to understand about terrorism. The foundation, the unrelentless conviction to that ideology must not be underestimated. This is what grounds these groups. The Islamic State has seen Africa in its totality as a moment of expansion. They need to propagate this global expansion where they can to its followers to show to them that they have not been defeated by the caliphate. And this global expansion includes Southern Africa. I'm not saying we should add fuel to fire, but the reality of the matter is it remains relentless. And with a focus now on Africa, Nigeria, Mali, Burkina Faso, Togo, we've seen what has happened, although it's Al-Qaeda aligned in Somalia, tragic 2-bomb explosions. These terror groups remains adamant and convicted, and let us not for a moment think it is an easy process by means of giving employment, for instance, and we will deal with terrorism. There's a far-lying problem here at play, and that we need to understand when we deal with terrorism.
What level of faith is there globally, I wonder, in South Africa's ability to mount a successful counter-terrorism operation to prevent such attacks from actually going ahead successfully? Because earlier in the week, there was a report which appeared to suggest that, in fact, officials were on the cusp, shall we say, of making progress in an investigation in looking into a terrorism cell, but the alert issued by the US basically upended those plans.
Most likely the alert has impeded that specific investigation, but that takes us back to our point. There are activities at play within the region and within South Africa with the intent to execute some sort of attack, and that is the red flag. Where are we positioned in terms of all of this? History is against us, and I'm talking recent history. I'm looking at crime. I'm looking at border security. I'm looking at our forces, part of Samam in Mozambique, struggling to contain the insurgents in Cabo Delgado. Our intelligence service and the president indirectly admitted that is in a process of restructuring, focused on getting their gears together. And this raises, or it leads to public questions on how are they focused on extremism, how are they able to deal. And if I may just take you back to Mikile, the problem with this alert boils back to one thing: ineffective intelligence liaison or ineffective response to an intelligence report that should have been interrogated.
And when you talk about potential terror attacks, I mean, I don't know if you've seen it, but online jokes were flying about yesterday, in fact, by some people who at the Pride March, for instance, tweeting or on Instagram posting, when is the bomb coming? But that's not always how a terror attack happens, is it? Because I recall during Bastille Day celebrations in France not too long ago, when a man used a truck and rammed it into a crowd of people, killing more than 80.
And that is exactly the problem with terrorism. The tactics available to them does not have to be sophisticated, does not have to be a 9/11 type of attack. A person with a gun, a person with a car, a person with a hammer, a person with a knife will, with a calculated intent to cause mayhem, fear, and send a message, can walk into a crowd, execute the attack, and with the necessary consequences that plays into the hands of the terror groups. And herein lies the complexity in countering the lone wolf type of attacks, the organized type of attacks. And within an ever-growing vulnerability in South Africa, the opportunity just increases. And it leads to the question, is a terror attack in South Africa not an inevitable reality we are facing?
Well, that question then, and what you said earlier about the hysteria of the past few days as well, that sort of seeped into some of the discussions, where do we draw the line? What's the balance? And I wonder if the hysteria itself is not counterproductive.
The alert itself we can discuss, but yes, the hysteria for me, if I measure it and I look at all the responses, at the end of the day, the government was caught on the back foot. We cannot deny that. And they had to quickly respond. That, again, I'm taking back to intelligence liaison and what has gone wrong. But the hysteria was a clear message to government. We do not have a trust in your ability to deal with this situation. Like it or not, Mbekile, it's not nice to say. It is as if people believe the US more than the South African government. And this is where our problem lies now. How to instill this credibility. Because to manage hysteria, you need the confidence of the people. And it seems that there is a growing gap that needs to be addressed as quickly as possible. Otherwise, we're going to serve terror interest unintentionally.
Thank you very much for speaking to us. We're unfortunately starting to lose our connection to you, but grateful to speak to you today. Thank you.